And our first speaker is Gregor. He is an engineer, 4 years of experience in the private sector. And he did a capstone that I really found extraordinarily interesting. I was the advisor for this capstone, and we worked on this model quite a lot. And I think I'm going to introduce Gregor in a second, but I think one day you may see some of Gregor's, this idea that Gregor's had. It's possible you might see this come to fruition. It'll be a long time. But this is a really cool project. And Gregor, where are you right now? Are you, there you are. So Gregor's going to come up right now and get things started. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for the introduction, Corey. Hello, everyone in the room, online. I want to talk about the possibility to deploy offshore wind in Southern California in the future. And doing that, I want to use a model-based viability study. I want to start with the goals of my project. And the goals were to, first of all, come up with a model that is accounting for interdisciplinary factors and that is also using site-specific input. And then, based on this model, conduct scenario analysis that are evaluating the value development of sites in the future 10 years. And my main findings are that a sector-specific auction system for an energy price that is then insured for a certain amount of time could make sites in Southern California economically viable. And with that, offshore wind has the potential to contribute to a future renewable energy mix together in combination with solar here. I want to start with introducing the electricity market and the offshore wind industry. The main challenge is electrification. And electrification is a global trend to mitigate carbon emissions. This is coupled with a population growth. And here in Southern California, the already densely populated coastal areas are growing. Renewable policies are in place on the federal level, on the state level in particular, with Bill 100 that is aiming at 100% renewables in 2045. And to reach this goal, solar is deployed here, and solar has an intermittent character, so that to smoothen the supply, battery storage is needed. The technology for that is not ready yet, so battery storage isn't broadly distributed. Power plants that can contribute constant energy source, like the San Onofre nuclear power plant, are shut down. The San Onofre was shut down and was actually representing 10% of the demand in California. Is now replaced with natural gas turbines. The transmission infrastructure is partially outdated, leading to wildfires. And demand peaks are not only grown because of the electrification and population growth, but also because of more severe heat waves that result in more use of ACs, and therefore in the afternoon and evenings, the peaks are increasing. All that leads to an increased value of reliability of the whole grid. And a reliable source, renewable energy source, is offshore wind. Offshore wind can be divided into fixed bottom and floating offshore wind. Fixed bottom offshore wind is deployable up to 60 meters depth. There's around 30 gigawatts installed, mainly in the EU and China, due to shallow waters, to policies, and also to the infrastructure, for example, vessels that can actually construct those turbines. Floating offshore is deployable up to 1,000 meters, but there's no capacity pretty much installed. This is due to the fact that we're in a pre-commercial phase here where a lot of design is optimized and analyzed to keep those turbines afloat. But 80% of the resource of offshore wind is in waters deeper than 60 meters, so it's worth really focusing on that. The offshore wind market in the US is based or mainly focused on the East Coast due to the fact that the water is shallow and fixed bottom can be deployed. All these areas are planned areas. There's one wind farm off of Rhode Island that is producing energy. There are some areas on the West Coast also. Two just were approved by the government and now need to be planned out further. Overall, development targets were 28 gigawatts defined in 2020 up to 2035, but the Biden administration is calling for 30 gigawatts in 2030. So more planning, more deployment has to be done. And to use this momentum and bring Southern California into the discussion, I want to present the Southern California Offshore Wind model, the SOCAOW. The SOCAOW is based on costs and benefits, and for a power plant, those costs and benefits can be expressed in levelized cost and levelized avoided cost of energy. The levelized costs are a sum of an annual share of the total capex plus an annual opex, and is divided by production. And the annual revenue, the levelized avoided costs are the annual revenue plus capacity value, also divided by the production. The capacity value is representing how much a source is contributing to a reliable grid, energy grid. And the net value in the SOCAOW is defined using 8 modules. They all consider site-specific and unspecific parameters. For example, the site module is considering monthly and hourly wind speed data, and this is very site-specific. The turbine module, for example, considers different maximum power outputs of the turbine, and turbines are produced and distributed globally, so that's not a specific site-specific parameter. Other modules are transmission infrastructure and electricity market, development and construction, the operation and maintenance, finance, and policies. Processing data in the SOCAOW is depending on the data type. Spatial data is processed in ArcGIS, and then site-specific data is passed on to Excel. There's a lot of post-analysis and literature data, mainly from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. They are working on that for decades already. And the cost assumptions and performance assumptions are approximated, specified, depending on the data availability. And then in Excel, CapEx, OpEx, production, and revenue is calculated and refined on a scenario, and then the end result is a net value for the site. To find deployment areas, possible sites, the bathymetry data set was filtered for the depth of 60 to 1,000 meters. Then all marine protected areas and fishing vessel tracks were excluded to account for proven fishing grounds. And then the annual wind speed in those areas were analyzed, and this plot shows the results here. Where it's red, wind speeds are high, and then moving towards the coast, wind speeds are decreasing with distance to coast. Also, all other ship traffic was considered, and where the white transparent areas are, the least ships are navigating. And then 3 sites were chosen along the coast, kind of representing the populated areas of, in the north, Oxnard, Ventura, then Los Angeles, and San Diego in the south. And this is an example for the site-specific input. Here a plot of the annual hourly wind speeds of March, a little higher than the average. But the typical curve is that they kind of are the lowest around noon, and then gradually increase and peak in the evening. And just qualitatively, the solar supply is kind of peaking in those hours, so they can work well together, those 2 renewable sources. Other factors are the depth, wave height, and distances to the coast, distances to ports for construction and maintenance, and distances on land to connect to the grid. 2 scenarios were then conducted based on this, both looking into 10 years into the future and considering 3 deployment points in time, 2022, 2027, and 2032. And the first scenario was considering a constant output of the total farm, a constant nameplate capacity. But the rated turbine power, so the power a turbine could produce is going up, and therefore less turbines can produce the same amount of maximum power output. And with less turbines, the construction costs and the maintenance costs go down. Also, learning rate was applied to CapEx and OpEx, and the results are those net value developments. All net values are negative. No site is economically viable by itself. Over time, site 1 is decreasing the most in negative net value. This is due to the fact that site 1 has the highest wind speeds and is the closest to the coast. Based on this scenario, a second scenario was considering those net values and trying to break even at each site for each point in time, so to bring this net value down to 0. And just as an example here, site 1 in 2022 has a negative net value of 64. So this gap of $64 per megawatt hour needs to be closed. And 2 carbon mitigation policies were evaluated: carbon price and direct subsidy. And the carbon price, an emission of an advanced natural gas turbine was used, and then dividing the gap by this emission a carbon price needed would be $190 per ton in this example for site 1. The direct subsidy is just representing the gap, so the direct subsidy would be $64 per megawatt hour. The development of the carbon price over all sites and all in the future would range between 190 to 620 in 2022 and 55 to 260 in 2032. For a comparison, the highest carbon tax right now, the highest carbon price is a carbon tax in Sweden. And this is at $120 per ton of CO2. Pretty much like site 1 could break even in 2027 using this tax, no other site would. The Californian carbon tax is at $15 per ton right now. The second mitigation policy, the direct subsidy, is developing from 64 to 210 in 2022 down to 18 to 88 in 2032. And a direct subsidy system is implied in place in the leading offshore wind markets in the EU. And this auction system is defining a price for energy for a site. And this price was developing between 2010 and 2020 from $170 per megawatt hour down to $50 per megawatt hour. This strike price includes already the market price for electricity. So to adjust for California and then project to the next 10 years, the price of $34 per megawatt hour, which is the electricity price, was subtracted. And then this strike prices in the EU could actually make site 1 and 2 viable for 2022 and 2027, and then it would kind of die down in 2032. But it's important to say that this is for fixed bottom offshore wind, which is less costly, and floating offshore wind is more costly, and then those prices are kind of assumed to be higher. For a comparison here again, the direct subsidy system in California is the investment tax credit system, and this would increase LACE, or the LACEs, on around about $17 per megawatt hour, which wouldn't really help any site. I want to finish with my recommendations, and first of all, transparent research is needed. The SOCAOW is the first step. It needs to be refined, detailed, to really have reliable net value information. Interdisciplinary development is needed. The NREL is doing it already. It needs to be maintained, and there's a lot of innovation power potential in those floating offshore wind structures. Solar and offshore wind work well together, complementary energy sources that peak in different times. A sector-specific government support is needed. This is a high-risk investment sector, and it will be for the next 10 years. And the mindset in California is a pioneering mindset for renewable solutions, for electrification solutions. This can be used. There's a lot of knowledge and infrastructure in the traditional oil and gas offshore industry that can be used. And overall, a stable and a green supply and a constant supply of renewable power using floating offshore wind is possible. And since there's a global potential here, a huge global potential, California could well become a hub for this industry and export the technology globally. Thank you very much for your attention.
Question is, I think we pay 16 cents per kilowatt hour in San Diego. Your cost figures show initially 13.6 cents per kilowatt hour and then 0.17 cents per kilowatt hour after startup. Are these astronomical cost savings likely to be passed on to consumers?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure, why not? I think we pay 16 cents per kilowatt hour here in San Diego. Your cost figures show initially 13.6 cents per kilowatt hour and then 0.017 cents per kilowatt hour after startup. Are these astronomical cost savings likely to be passed on to consumers?
In what cost figure? I'm trying to figure out where actually I showed that, because I'm thinking in megawatt hours and kilowatt hours, so I have to divide by 1,000, I guess. But
so I think we may have had just a unit of magnitude misread there with the question, possibly, right?
Yeah, but I mean 16. I'm sorry, I guess I can't answer this question right now.
We have a little SI unit order of magnitude confusion, so we can't answer the question. Well, thanks for coming
so
up anyway, Gregor.
those prices were all in dollars per megawatt.
Yes,
If
so-
that helps.
Thanks, Gregor. That was an outstanding presentation. I'm interested in what part of your project did you find to be the most difficult? Was that the data collection, figuring out what numbers to use? Was it the research itself? What was challenging for you?
Thanks for the question. The most challenging part for me was to set up the model and make it work in a way that it would make sense. There are still a lot of parameters and factors and little bits and pieces that can be optimized, definitely. And this is, I'd say, the hardest part was that in this project. Thanks.
Gregor, what are the, well, first, can you briefly explain what CapEx and OpEx, capital expenditure and operating expenditure, are?
Yes, so capital expenditure are all costs to build the site, and the operational expenditure are all costs that are annual costs for operation and maintenance of the site.
Okay, thank you for the question, Kai. Innovation potential in terms of floating offshore, what are some of the opportunities that exist there?
So first of all, those floating substructures are, for now, the role model is the offshore oil and gas industry, and those platforms are really unique structures. And in order to kind of standardize the construction of these floating structures, there's a lot of there needs to be a lot of optimization of design and also like focusing on this standardization process or possibility. The model is based on a semi-submersible substructure that is called Aquaventus and developed by the University of Maine, and they use concrete instead of steel, which makes it less, I guess, the corrosion is less, is impacting the substructure less, and it can be also built on site on the port, and no like big steel structures need to be kind of shipped around.
Any other questions?
Mark?
Gregor, there's San Nicolas Island offshore. Was there any consideration of using actual islands? Sorry. Yeah, Southern California has the offshore islands. And so was there any consideration of using those instead of floating platforms?
Yeah, I didn't consider that yet in the model. I was thinking about considering it for operation and maintenance possibilities, maybe to kind of develop a port there to operate and maintain. Those structures are afloat, so they can pretty much be towed out and in easily, and the mooring system can just be in place and then reattached again. So this could be a possibility. And thinking about Denmark and hydrogen, that is connected there to floating offshore. Maybe those islands could be used to actually take wind energy and then produce hydrogen with it. And yeah. All right.